collegefootballnerds.com, coming at you with a little more content, off-season content. This is probably going to come out before our discussion that we had with RJ Young. I think it's coming out later this week. It looks a little different around here. I made some changes. I painted a wall, much to my wife's chagrin, but I think I picked a decent color. I did not mean to pick blue on blue, but that's what we're stuck with right now. IKEA getting it done. All right, y'all. It's good to see you again. Hopefully, we're going to be talking to you in the comments about this particular topic. It's the AAF, Alliance of American Football, had a pretty good, or is having a pretty good first season. I want to see if there's a way that the AAF can help college football with the whole paying the players thing and getting players into the NFL. And so Josh is with me to get nerdy, but not quite as nerdy because it's not going to be numbers and more of a high-level discussion. So let's get into it. Remember, subscribe if you haven't, but you have already probably. And let us know in the discussion comments below what you think about it. All right, Josh. The big news today was that Johnny Manziel is signed to be a quarterback for, I think, Memphis, who's running through quarterbacks pretty quickly. And I think a lot of the original notion for the AAF was to have these mid-market teams, which we've seen this model before, these mid-market teams that can exist to have some name recognition, some hometown guys, that might be looking to get a second shot at the NFL or might just want to play football and get a paycheck, and they haven't fully come to terms with maybe retirement or whatever. And so far, that model's proven pretty well. I think it's been a decently well-received league. I think the attendance numbers are okay, and it probably has a bit of longevity. I think it had a good second year. But the one side of this is the, hey, let's see if we can do well enough in my career to get me back to the NFL. But the other side of this, I'm thinking, and I've always maintained, is that one of the biggest problems in college football is that people think that college athletes should be paid. A lot of people think that. And it really muddies up the waters in terms of amateur athletics. And I've always said that they should have a minor league system for the NFL so kids can come straight out of high school. Most kids are not. Even the elite talent are not ready for the NFL day one straight out of high school. So they have that D-League sort of thing for kids who don't care about getting an education or think they'll go back and get one later, who aren't suited for college or are, but are better suited for the NFL. And they can start earning that paycheck sooner rather than later, and it sort of eliminates some of the negativity associated with college football. And it also clears out potentially a lot of people that are just looking for a paycheck. So one, do you think there's some merit there to a minor league in general to solve some of these problems? And two, if so, from what you've seen so far with the AAF, could that be it?
I think the most interesting thing about the AAF to a certain degree is how much it pays players and how financially viable it is and how that compares to what players should be expecting if they remain in college. So I think the current salary for an AAF player is about $70,000. I think that's what I've heard.
Yeah, I think they're all on multi-year $250,000 contracts, but that's the total value of the contract, not necessarily the per year, and they all make the same. So I think it does come out to about $75,000.
So the interesting thing about that, and you can talk about evaluations and how the accounting's done, because accounting tends to be sometimes very creative, but they say a college football player, the value of his years in football is somewhere around $250,000 to $500,000. And at certain schools, they say that the value of their total experience is about $250,000 of a year. Some places like Alabama, and that may seem extreme, but college tuition now is $40,000, $60,000 a year. Two, the resources they have in terms of not just lodging and meals, but meals with specialized diets for them, access to training tables, access to training and weight room equipment, personalized tutoring, the value of their education, both as a student and as an athlete. It all has a tremendous amount of value. So I think part of the whole framework of the discussion is why I'm starting with this is, one, you have to realize that the amount of money that these players are getting in the AAF is arguably less than the college guys are getting in terms of value in college. So we can get into that discussion of whether or not, which one's worth more and later, but sort of give that general framework there. I think it's sort of an effective foil in that viewpoint. Now, if AAF gave a much larger amount of money, I think it would be extremely disruptive to college, because at that point people would forego college to go play AAF so they could get the huge paycheck. One of the interesting things that happened with Kyler Murray is people had a question about whether he could play baseball or play the NFL because MLB contracts are so high. The problem with Murray is that he was going to have to play in the minor leagues for a bit, and he would have been a millionaire, but the amount of money he would have gotten in that minor league contract would have been the initial signing bonus, and then almost no more unless he made it to the major leagues. So it's very hard to make it to the major leagues, even if you're a very high pick. Chances were pretty decent that he would have made about $10 million and then wouldn't have made it to the majors, or at least at a high level, and he'd be done. The NFL is actually going to guarantee him much more than that. The ceiling is much lower than the MLB if you're a really high-level MLB player. But if he's the number one overall pick, he's probably going to make somewhere between 20 and 50 million, even if he only goes a couple contracts. And
so for all the complaints about guaranteed money not being there in the NFL, the guaranteed money when you're first coming out, if you never make it, if you never satisfy the initial, fanfare that you get coming out of their respective sport, the guaranteed money is actually a lot better in the NFL.
Right. It is. And Murray was even a more special case because he's a quarterback. You're much less likely to be injured. And the worst case scenario is maybe he ends up being a backup and you make a tremendous amount of money. But I'm kind of touching on this because it gets to another point that's underlying all this. If you take the AAF route and you make $70,000 a year and you get hurt, what are you going to get out of it? I mean, you're not making a ton of money here. And if you get hurt in college, you're going to get a scholarship. You have a scholarship. You're going to get a college degree. You're going to be able to get a job doing something else. You have exposure as a college player. If you go the AAF route and you get hurt, yeah, you've made $140,000 or $210,000 over 2 or 3 years. And then you're done. It's dried up. It's like being a journeyman in minor league baseball. So I think there's also a tremendous amount to be said that, when we talk about the value of a college athlete, and people sort of poo-poo on the idea that none of them have real degrees. And sure, you don't see any electrical engineers coming out of college football. There is something to be said the fact that they do have a college degree. They have something tangible even if they get injured and don't go further. And I think people sort of underestimate how much that's worth, and they overestimate how likely it is to be injured in college versus if you went and played for somebody like the AAF and you got hurt, because your career is over there just as easily. And the chances of making any guaranteed money there aren't really any better than it is out of college.
Part of this too, you mentioned getting hurt. I think it's interesting because I do think also that you have a better chance of coming back if you get hurt in college, because one of the things that's really undervalued and you never see as a line item when people are talking about how college football players, college basketball players are exploited is the trainers, the staff, the facilities that all, yes, everybody knows the head coach, but you're getting NFL level, world-class level training. Whereas I guarantee you the AAF guys aren't developing their skills in a way to get better or protecting themselves, having the staff to protect them if they get hurt in a way that they would in college football. And what's interesting about that is college football, if you get hurt and you're, the second or third string guy, but they want you to be good maybe down the road, they're going to treat you like a highline starter in the NFL. You're going to get the same resources, the same nutrition, like you said. It's funny, nutrition, you mentioned that. Anybody who is curious can go back and watch the ESPN special they did Fall in Alabama around last year. These guys are eating like steak and lobster, all you can eat kind of thing. But beyond that, and we can talk a little bit more about the facilities, the barbershop and the indoor pools and the everything that they have available at a modern college football player's disposal. We can talk about that in a minute. I'm curious if you think a lot of the push to pay a college athlete is because we've actually just gone ahead and devalued the college education piece of it. And either because these are all football factories and they only care about athletics, or from a higher level society construct, we've just devalued that and we only see them and their value as athletes.
I don't think there's any doubt that the education side has been sort of downplayed or underrated. There's an irony there. They talk about not everybody gets degrees and they have easy degrees. And the irony is the guys that don't graduate generally are the guys that go pro early, which means they're multi millionaires. And the guys that aren't as good, that don't go pro, are usually the ones that stick for 4 years and they get a degree, and often a master's degree if they're fourth. A lot of these guys, because they study over the summer while they're there training and doing their conditioning stuff, they usually graduate in less than 4 years. So they very frequently have graduate degrees or advanced degrees if they stay through 5 years with a redshirt year. I do think the education part is undervalued. I think having a degree is a big deal. Some of these kids come from means. Some of these kids come from not very much means at all, and they wouldn't have a route to get a degree otherwise. And a lot of the kids that have a nothing degree, to a certain extent, it's because they come in from an environment where they're underprepared for college, and the universities give them the resources to pass classes to get a degree, and often the first degree in their families. And there are other kids, and I always find it funny when people complain about some football player having a Dodge Charger or what have you, just because they assume every one of these football players comes from a poor family, and they don't really understand how many of them actually have well-to-do families.
Right.
And especially when all your college is paid for, not these kids are not all poor. Those kids sometimes maybe they would have a more, quote, prestigious degree. But, I mean, honestly, a lot of them still have business degrees or finance degrees or whatnot anyway. And they get a tremendous amount of connections, too, on top of it all. So I think that all has a tremendous amount of value. What I think is really the driving force in all this, it's less even underestimating the value of the education. And it's just this general concept that it's of fairness, that the players actually need to be paid and they need to get the amount of money. I think the problem with that focus, though, is making the mistake of putting all your valuation of the players based on maybe probably the top 500 to top 1,000 players in the country, which may seem like a lot. But with 130 teams, there's... what is it, about 13,000 football players roughly in college football? Maybe less than that, maybe about 12,000. I'm a math screwy because I don't want to have to stop and think about it while I'm talking. But the players can't all make the kind of money that, your high profile Kyler Murray could draw in, and not even remotely. The vast majority of players wouldn't have any sort of endorsement deals. And I think a lot of this has to do with fairness, and a lot of it is not understanding how far, what the salaries would actually look like, or the income would look like if it's split evenly amongst the players, and whether or not that's actually going to be more than people get in the AAF right now.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. I also point out to people when they say college athletes should be paid, it's not, like you said, it's not fair. If you remove... If you add into the equation a paycheck because you think college players are being exploited, you do need to calculate the fact that, look, I graduated college with $30,000 in debt. My wife graduated law school with $100,000 in student loan debt. That's something a college athlete doesn't have to pay when they leave college, which is income, money in the bank, essentially, once they leave college. They also don't have to pay room and board for 4 years. They don't have to pay for food for 4 years. They don't have to pay for clothes for 4 years. So I do think that those things need to be considered. But I do wonder, getting back to the AAF, let's say, for argument's sake, the AAF did open their league up to the top players coming out of college. And look, there are some economics behind some families who, for better or worse, need money now. And if they have the ability for someone in the family to bring money into the family, even that $75,000 a year could be huge to them. So I completely understand that angle, but a lot of people say it would hurt the sport. I argue that it wouldn't. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. So if a minor league, D League type system got big enough that it was taking all the top talent out of college football, let's say the top 5% of talent, um, I I argue that it just drops everybody down 5% and it doesn't impact the game at all. So let's say the top players on your team all run, 4.3, 4.4 40s, and they're in that top 5%. And now they're in the AAF. As a fan, does your enjoyment of the game lessen because the best players are running 4.5s? Can you even tell? If everybody equally across the board is reduced, you take this pool of players across the board, it's reduced, then you have that same parity and you're back to where you were before. And then you're going to have players that rise up and make it to the NFL out of college just like they would before. So I would argue that it doesn't hurt the game that much, but it does benefit the game because it sort of cuts through all the BS and says, okay, we don't have this problem of paying players and worrying about people being exploited anymore because there is this other option. And I think one of the big problems right now for college athletes is there is no option. So if there is this option exists, and it does take the top 5-10% of players, is it better for everybody all around? Because then you get the people that are there to get an education and they are student athletes, even if they're elite. And you have the outlet for the people that really need money now or don't care at all about getting a college education and just want to play sports?
I think theoretically, now a lot of this is tied into the conversation we just had, right? What is actually more valuable for the student athlete? Is the degree valuable? Is the training they're receiving and the level of care and the coaching and the development better at the college level? I think in your theory, this minor league football would be at a much higher level than the AAF is currently. I think that kind of has to happen. If it's a $70,000 contract, I don't know that it's really good for these kids. I don't think they're better off making $70,000 than they are getting their college degree. Now, if they can get individual...
But are they better off if they get the choice to decide one way or the other for themselves?
Right, and I agree with that, but I think you have to divorce it from the idea that it would just be the top 5%, right? Because if you took even really high-level players like Kyler Murray last year, as good as he is, and you threw him in the AAF level with guys that a lot of them played on the NFL teams at some level, and a lot of those guys are really high-level college players, I'm not sure how spectacular Kyler Murray would be in that environment. It's not quite the same as being a rookie by any means in the NFL, but that's still an extremely competitive environment, and he's not going to shine the same way he did in college. So I don't know in that world if he's going to have the massive Nike shoe deal. I don't know that that's going to happen because I don't know that he's going to be the ultra-dominant player that he was in college against college competition when he's playing semi-pro football against, a lot of guys that were actually NFL caliber players themselves, and they're older and they're more mature and they're a lot more experienced. I think that whole thing is an open question. And I think it's important to say every bit of discussion here really hinges on the idea that they just go to the minor leagues and it's going to be just as popular. I really doubt that's going to happen. But, okay, let's just take it and assume that the top 5% goes. And we'll just assume that works out that way. In that world, it's kind of interesting to think about what's going to happen and how that would affect recruiting. Is it going to be like college, baseball and certain things where you sign players and you don't know if they're going to get drafted because you don't know if they're going to leave? Recruiting is based around the idea that you get the best players in the country. But it's kind of weird if you recruit and you don't know that if you get guys that are too good, they're all going to go play AAF. And do you replace them? Are you allowed to replace them? I'm not sure how you square recruiting in that scenario. I do think it keeps... If you can't really square it away, it's going to create a lot of parity. And college football is going to be more about the teams that are coached better. I think a lot of people would really enjoy that because the sport's going to be more volatile. You're not going to have the situation where you have now where your Alabamas and your Georgias and your Clemsons that recruit at the highest levels in college football dominate because they're just that much more talented than everybody else. It's going to be hard to do that in that environment. You're going to have to rely more on your coaching. But I don't think it would necessarily be bad for football. And I think the minor leagues could be successful. But I think there's a lot of assumptions there that are being made that I'm not sure if they actually would take place in any more than a hypothetical world.
So you mentioned something there sort of buried in what you were saying that I think sort of touched on exposure, and that's another thing that I think is highly undervalued with college athletics. Even if you're a second teamer or a starter but not an elite talent at any of the top 20, 30 schools, or even the not so great schools or not so great teams that play against the better schools, you're playing in front of millions of people. You got millions of eyeballs on you. And in person, you might have 100,000 eyeballs on you, where Birmingham and Memphis AAF teams are playing in front of 10, 15,000 people. That's a whole different level of exposure, scouts, notoriety, like you said, being able to leverage endorsement deals. If you come out of the AAF and you're really good, playing in front of 10,000 people and barely having ratings that are as good as Friends reruns on a Saturday night, that's another thing that we can't put a dollar value on for the college athlete, even the not top line talent athlete, that they're not getting paid, but they are getting notoriety. And a little plug to Gary Vee, a guy that I kind of really admire. He did a talk. I think he did one at Alabama last year and did a couple of other teams. I just saw it because it was on ESPN. And he talked about how a lot of the players at Alabama have a ton of social capital, but just because they play for Alabama, that they're not currently leveraging now on campus, both for them personally and for good of the community, and aren't seeing that if they start leveraging it now, it builds sort of a foundation for their future outside of football. Because they play for Alabama, somebody knows them and will give them a job or give them connections that they're not going to get if they play for the AAF. And that's another thing that we don't put a dollar value on. And I wonder, kind of what you think about that.
A lot of this gets to the idea of how successful an AAF would be if it was a fully endorsed, fully supported minor league. And I think the problem from a lot of people that come from a pro sports angle is they just assume if you had created a minor league, it would be as popular as college sports. I don't think that would happen. I just don't think they're ever going to get the buy-in that the currently dominant college teams have, in large part because, again, when you're talking the great old universities, your Texas and your Alabama and your Ohio State, these teams have been playing football for well over 100 years.
Right.
And my parents were football fans. My parents went to games with my grandparents as kids. My grandparents went to games with their parents when they were kids. That's what the sport is. That's how I got to the level of where I care this much about college football to do this show. I don't think you're going to get that buy-in at any point in a minor league. And if you don't have that buy-in, then like you said, there's so much assumed value that doesn't exist. And you can be a really, really great player and the best player in the AAF, and you're not going to get a Nike shoe deal the way you will if you're Kyler Murray tearing it up at Oklahoma or you're Tua Tagovailoa at Alabama. It's just not going to happen. So we can deal with the theoretical of the way we wish the world would work, but we have to deal at least at some level with the practicality of what would it be like for an actual person operating in this environment, an actual player playing for one of these teams if we did start up such a league. And I think in that world, the reality is, would they make more than $70,000 a year if it grew bigger? Yeah, probably. But would it ever be a true NFL level event? I don't think so. Not every NFL team at this point can fill out their stadium. Certainly. Again, right now, even when you talk college football, there's only about 10 college football teams that can actually turn a profit. And something a lot of people miss in that is those are nonprofit entities that aren't fully taxable. And only 10 of them can turn a profit with all the resources they dump into the student athletes. So there's just a hard cap on how much money a minor league pro team is going to be able to invest in their athletes and pay them. There's a hard cap on how successful they are going to be without tradition, and they have to do it now in a taxed environment. I just don't know that they're ever going to be able to play the players that much the way some people seem to think they're going to.